Our study this morning is in the 65th chapter of Isaiah, Isaiah 65, beginning with verse 13 or 14. Isaiah 65, verse 14. Don, would you word a prayer for us this morning? Amen. 14th verse of the 65th chapter of Isaiah, verses 14, 15, and 16 relate to the blessings that are, and it's kind of intermingling here, the blessings for those that are righteous, punishment for those that are unrighteous. And then from verse 17 to the rest of the chapter, the prophet talks about the new heaven and the new earth. Now, let's think about what this doesn't mean, this new heaven and new earth. It doesn't mean the new heaven and new earth of Revelation, because that was the end time. It talks about a new era. The new era, the new system was going to be very different than the old system, the old Jewish system. Now, let's think about that for a moment here and kind of get our minds wrapped around this idea of the new era, the new covenant, the new Jerusalem, the new heaven and earth, so to speak. And let's put ourselves in the minds of Jews. What was the Jewish system like? Well, the Jewish system was a national system. The new system, the new covenant era, was international. Maybe we should say it had nothing to do with nations. The old system had to do with being born into the system, physically born into the system. The new system has to do with being born of the water and the Spirit. Altogether different venue, altogether different mentality. The old system had to do with animal sacrifice. New system has nothing to do with animal sacrifice. The old system had to do with Well, you help me. Contrast the old and the new, in addition to what I've said. The old system was ritualistic, right? New system has a pattern, but it's not ritualistic. The old system had to do with a temple. What about the new system with regard to the temple? It's a people temple, not a physical temple. See, the old system had to do with a particular piece of real estate called Palestine, more specifically Jerusalem. New system, not so. Help me with some other contrasts between the old and the new. Yeah, it had to do with keeping the Mosaic system. New Testament has to do with the law of Christ. Help me again here in terms of contrasting the old. Good point, Donald. We had a high priest that represented the folks, and now in the new system, you're the priest, but your mediator is different than the Old Testament priest. What else is different here in this new system? Yeah, we mentioned they had an animal sacrifice system, and in the new system, we're daily sacrifices. What else? Well, there are other contrasts, but from verses like 17 on, we have this description of this glorious new system. Now, maybe we shouldn't call it a system. This glorious new environment, different from the environment of the old. Now, can we understand then that the Jews would have had maybe a difficult time understanding or relating to this? Wouldn't it be hard for them to give up that lifestyle, that nationalism? Wouldn't it be hard to give that up? No, just in a small way. Would we want to give up? And let's just think of this in secular terms for a moment. Would we want to give up our patriotism, our attitude toward America, our citizenship in America, and have the United Nations run, our political system? Would we be happy with that? Ken's pretty emphatic. I mean, wouldn't it be? That would be. I wouldn't want that to happen. Well, you see, they had. I think we have to give. We have to be a little bit sympathetic to the Jews, in terms of their not being willing to give up, their heritage, so to speak. Well, we're going to get into 17 and beyond there in just a moment, but let's finish up this intermittent blessings with curses identified in verses 14, 15, and 16. Behold, my servants shall sing for joy of heart. That is the remnant, the people that are really in tune with God, the righteous. But ye shall cry for sorrow of heart, and shall howl for vexation of spirit. And ye shall leave your name for a curse unto my chosen. And ye shall leave your name for a curse unto my chosen. Thinking there of the Jewish name, did the behavior of the Jewish people and their attitude and their demeanor and so forth, did that become a stumbling block, or did that become a problem for the Gentile world? Paul addresses that. He said, that you people are the Jewish people were not the example you ought to have been. I'm saying it. I'm paraphrasing here. Not the example you ought to have been, but you've been. You've got a bad reputation. You see. And you shall leave your name for a curse unto my chosen. The Gentiles blasphemed God as a result of the behavior of the Jews. Or it was a stumbling block there. And for the Lord God shall slay thee, and call his servants by another name. Now, this is the third time that we've looked, as we've studied Isaiah, this is the third time that we've had this matter of another name. Another name. And obviously, that other name, it was not Jews, it wasn't Israel. It was, well, we know, Christian. And while we're at that point, have any of you ever heard somebody say, well, he's not a Church of Christ Christian? Ever heard anybody say that? I mean, what kind of talk is that? A Church of Christ Christian. Pretty redundant, isn't it? Well, so in terms of names, this world and the religious world is so confused. I read that there are over 63,000, I can't believe this, but somebody's figured out, over 63,000 different kinds of churches in the world. 63,000. I don't know how they counted them. 50 years ago, you thought, there are 200 or 300 denominational groups, but there's these groups have proliferated exponentially. So the new name has been abused and just trodden under the foot of mankind. Verse 16, that he who has blessed himself in the earth shall bless himself in the God of truth. Wonder why? I don't think all of the versions talk about. One version talks about the God of Amen, but God of truth. What does that? What does that say to us? God of truth. Well, the source of truth, the source of truth. And he that sweareth in the earth shall swear by the God of truth, because the former troubles are forgotten, and because they are hid from mine eyes. In what way is things hidden from God's eyes? Pardon me? Yeah, in terms of redemption, forgiveness, you see. So, now let's look into this. For behold, I create new heavens and new earth, and the former shall not be remembered, not come into mind. Now, here he has to be talking about the Christian era, the era of the Messiah. Now, he's not talking here about some time in the future when Jesus is going to come and reign on the earth. By the way, Tim, how many more Wednesday evenings are you going to talk about premillennialism?
I don't know for sure.
Okay, well, that's your prerogative. But if you're, this information that Tim is presenting on Wednesday evening about the premillennialist doctrine is good stuff for us to to get our minds around. And there's so many people have this idea. I suppose a majority of the religious people in America believe that there's going to be a 1,000-year reign of Christ. And he's not talking about that. I mean, that's error. So this new heaven and this new earth, and he's not talking about the revelation of at the end of time. He's talking about the era of the Messiah. In verse 18, and he's going to describe this new heaven and new earth, this new era, the church age, the Christian age, and in terms of what the Jews of that era could understand. Now, what was their perception? What was the Jewish perception of let's say, good times or a joyous time? What was their perception of it? Well, their perception would have been, and I've used this illustration before, but everybody having their own vineyard, having their own, plot of land. And as Roosevelt said back in the Depression, he was advocating a time when there'd be a chicken in every pot. Now, you young people wouldn't understand that kind of stuff, but that was the idea of having a meal, not being hungry. I think Norma probably remembers that kind of expression. So the terms that they would understand would be, a good agriculture economy. What else? They would be protected from the nations around about, those nations that would be raiding them, raiding their fields and burning their fields, and them planting crops, and then the enemy coming in and reaping the benefit of those crops. How else would the Jews perceive as having a good life? I'm sorry? No, not being, them having sovereignty, not being overcome by, foreign powers. How else would they perceive as a good life? Peace, a peaceable situation. Now, he's going to describe here, Isaiah is describing here, in those kind of terms, he's describing the new era. The new era is going to be like this. Okay, Um, but, verse 18, but be ye glad and rejoice forever in that which I create. For behold, I create Jerusalem, a rejoicing, and her people a joy. I wonder why he invokes this idea of, I'll create Jerusalem. You know, this is for a Jewish audience here. Well, Jerusalem was the in secular terms in our nation, D.C. We know that conveys, that we identify with that, Washington D.C. I will create Jerusalem. And applying that term, that emotion that is conjured up in the minds of the Jews with this new era. And a rejoicing, and her people a joy. And I will rejoice in Jerusalem, and joy in my people. And the voice of weeping shall be no more heard in her, nor the voice of crying. Now, does that mean that in the new era there aren't going to be any hardships? There aren't going to be any problems. There aren't going to be any weeping. There aren't going to be any issues that we have to deal with? I don't think so, because we know that. I think somebody was preaching the other day about televangelists who appeal to people that come join our effort here, and you're going to get rich, and you're going to have the good life. Everything's going to be. Didn't I hear that preaching? Were you preaching that? Yeah, I see. I was listening. Yeah. That was part. That's part of the deal there. All right, he's not talking about that. He's using these physical terms, that would relate. The Jewish mind could relate to having a good, a good, peace. Now this is kind of I shouldn't even mention this, but I was a kid when the World War II was going on. Very few of you can. And I had this dream about the Germans coming across the field. Coming across our farm field, coming after us. Now, and that war was way off, right? That war was way away from America, fortunately. But you can imagine kids, young people, in that Jewish economy, in that Jewish situation where, they were oftentimes raided, and assaulted, and you can imagine how the kids particularly would have related to those kind of things. It would have been a scary thing, right? Well, he says, and not going to be those kind of things. There's going to be isn't going to be this weeping and so forth in terms of this new system. Although there are issues and problems in everyday life, obviously. Verse 20, there shall be no more thence an infant of days. Now here's an interesting passage here. There shall be no more thence an infant of days, nor an old man that hath not filled his days. For the child shall die 100 years old, but the sinner being 100 years old shall be accursed. Now, What in the world does this have to do with anything? Well, how does God view time? A day is 1,000 years. So this has to do with, really has to do with if an unrighteous person lives to be 100 or whatever, they're going to enjoy they're going to suffer consequences of their evil. If a righteous person dies young, like Stephen, when he was stoned to death, as far as God is concerned, time is quantity of time. It's the quality that God's looking for, not quantity. And that's all this verse is talking about. Any further? Anybody have any further understanding of that verse 20? Anybody? Tim?
I just think he's telling them that you're not going to be cut off in your youth anymore. You'll live to be a ripe old age. Those things that you were talking about that would bring sudden death to children and young men.
Yeah.
They just lived through a siege from the Assyrians, and they suffered that, and so those things aren't going to happen anymore in this new heaven and new earth, in this kingdom. It's going to be known for its peace and its comfort.
Okay. And verse 21, and they shall build houses and inhabit them. Now, again, relating to something describing this kingdom, this new era, this Christian age in terms of what they would understand as being joyous and so forth. And they shall build houses and inhabit them, and they shall plant vineyards and eat the fruit of them. Now, isn't there something, anybody ever build a new house? Anybody here ever build a new house? No, David's built a new house. Something exciting about that, right? Just joyous. Or when you're moving to a new house, there's it can be a hassle. It can. It can be a hassle, but there's something kind of, it's kind of exciting about. It's a new venture. It's new, and they shall they shall build it, and another. And they shall not build and another inhabitant. Well, going back to verse 21, and they shall build houses and inhabit them, and they shall plant vineyards and eat the fruit of them. That's really living. That's the good life. And that's the way this Christian era is going to be. And they shall not build and another inhabit. Now, wouldn't that be something for if you build a house, you're settled in, and then the enemy comes along, boots you out of the house. You've escaped for your life. Well, that's not the way this new kingdom is going to be. They shall not build and another inhabit. They shall not plant and another eat. For as the days of a tree are the days of my people, and mine elect shall long enjoy the work of their hands. That's a good thing. That is a good thing. Enjoying the fruits of your labors. We use that expression sometimes. Enjoy the fruits of your labors. They shall not labor in vain. They shall not labor in vain. Or bring forth trouble, for they are the seed of the blessed of the Lord, and their offspring with them. Paul talked about not laboring in vain, didn't he? In the new era. They shall not labor in vain nor bring forth trouble, for they are the seed of the blessed of the Lord, and their offspring with them. Now that idea, the seed of the blessed of the Lord, does that kind of ring a bell in terms of the seed of Abraham? What was the seed of Abraham? What is the seed of Abraham? Through Abraham's seed shall all the what? Nations of the earth be blessed. I think he's, and of course, the church and the seed of Abraham are coterminous, so to speak. The church, seed of Abraham. They shall not labor in vain nor bring forth for trouble, for they are the seed of the blessed of the Lord, and there are offspring with them. And it shall come to pass that before they call, I will answer. What New Testament expression has that same idea? We heard some sermons on the Sermon on the Mount here recently, right? Is there anything in the Sermon on the Mount that relates to this? And he knows what you want before you even ask, right? So, I mean, and it shall come to pass that before they call, I will answer. And while they are yet speaking, I will hear. So, the New Testament version of that is that God knows what you need before you ask, and it shall come to pass. Okay. And the wolf and the lamb shall feed together, and the lion shall eat straw like the bullock, and dust shall be in the serpent's meat. Now, this idea of the wolf and the lamb, as it relates to this new era, the wolf and the lamb laying down together, and the lion eating straw. What does that? What's that? How does that play out in the kingdom? Peace. Okay. Well, elaborate on that a little bit. Who were the enemies of the Jews? Probably everybody, right? How did the Jews like the idea of the Gentiles being in the kingdom? Even the Jews who were converted to Christ, what they think about the Gentiles being a part of this whole thing? Some of them weren't very happy about it, right? Some of them were so unhappy that they finally accepted the idea, but then they said, okay, but you got to be a Jew first, right? You got to do this. You got to do this circumcision stuff. you've got to do some of the Jew stuff. The Jew, we talk about Judaizing teachers. Well, those teachers wanted the Gentiles to become, Jewish kind of people in connection with their being a member of the church. Well, the wolf and the lamb, this idea that peoples of all nations could come together in the kingdom. And of course, that played out in the first century when particularly Paul, we have record of Paul's ventures. We don't have record of, a lot of the other apostles' preaching endeavors. But in terms of the wolf and the lamb laying down together, there wouldn't be this national animosity one toward the other in the kingdom. Now, we, the congregation here, send a little support to various areas. Personally, some of you, support missionaries on your own, or support some missionary efforts on your own. You don't think twice about if somebody's in the Russian. By the way, politically, we're not very favorable to the Russians, right? I mean, as a nation, but wouldn't hesitate sending money to a missionary in Russia. Or we're not very friendly with the Iraqis or the Iranians, but we wouldn't have any trouble sending, as a nation. But we wouldn't have any trouble sending support to Iran, to a brother teaching in Iran if they get in there, right? So there's just a different mentality in the church. That there aren't any national enemies in the church, whether they be Chinese, Russian, Polish, whatever. It's just one family in the church. So the wolf and the lamb shall feed together, and they shall not hurt nor destroy all my holy mountains, saith the Lord. There's not going to be any national, there's not going to be any Russian attempt or American attempt to destroy the church, as far as individuals are concerned. So, Isaiah closes that chapter there with the idea that this new era is going to be one that's much different than the Jewish economy and the Jewish existence as a nation. Any other comments anyone wants to make with regard to that particular chapter? If not, then
I just kind of ties in with what you were saying earlier about premillennialism, but one of the big problems that people have is that they literalize these passages. I imagine everybody here has seen a picture of a wolf lying down with a lamb. And, that's supposed to be they believe that's actually going to happen. Lions aren't going to eat meat anymore. They're going to eat grass when this new kingdom on earth is set up. And that's just a misunderstanding of this language. And like you said before, he's trying to explain it to them in terms that they would understand, to speak of the glory of this new kingdom that's going to be established, this new Jerusalem. But many people today are still missing that and trying to literalize these things. And so you see those kind of pictures.
yeah, and sometimes maybe they just want to misunderstand. Sometimes maybe they would kind of like this kind of earthly existence. But a lion is always going to be a lion. right? And a spider is always going to be a spider in terms of, those that bite. So thank you, Tim, for that that illustration. You have to wonder why people. Are the scriptures so hard to understand that there are these kind of misperceptions, the kind that you mentioned? I mean,
I don't think so, but there are a lot of people to misguide you, and that's the problem.
yeah. Okay. Well, chapter 66 then points to the final days of Judah and the continuing this idea of the glory of the new regime. It talks about the temple. There are references to the temple, and the temple is going to be the people rather than a physical item. Let's just start. We have a couple minutes here. Let's just read a couple of verses here to kind of get us thinking about next week's lesson. Thus saith the Lord, the heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. Now, Isaiah is going to, through God's word here, is going to identify the magnitude of God. Thus saith the Lord, the heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. Where is the house that ye build unto me? And where is the place of my rest? Now, for all those things that hath mine hand made, and all those things have been, saith the Lord, but to this man I will look, even to him that is poor, and of a contrite spirit, and trembleth at my word. Now this idea here that the idea of the temple there, the reference to the temple, what do you suppose he's getting at there? Let's read that again. Thus saith the Lord, the heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. Where is the house that ye can build unto me? Now they're referencing the idea of the temple. And where is the place of my rest? Now, when Solomon dedicated the temple, what did he say with regard to the temple being the place of God's presence or residence? Solomon acknowledged that there's no way that this temple would essentially be the home of God. In fact, God didn't even was the idea of a temple, was that in God's mind? Did God have in mind that the Jews build a temple? Or was that something that the Jews decided they needed and that they wanted? Well, let's begin there next week with that thought.